I'm just going to be talking about functions in Python. Now, before I start this video, I want to mention that this video is meant for beginners. So if you're not a beginner, I have a timestamp linked in the description below. Feel free to skip through the timestamp to refresh yourself on some of the concepts that you think you've forgotten and you need a quick refresher on. But if you are a beginner, I want you to stick with me through this video so that at the end of the video, you would get all the concepts that you need to know about Python function. Now, let's get right into the video. Now, first on the list, we have Python inbuilt functions, okay? Now, the inbuilt function comes with the Python standard library, and they give us some functionalities right on the go for us to use Python efficiently. So, such functions are the print function. Now, we see the print function in most of our program. Print hello world, print this, and print that. Now, the print function help us, okay, to actually display some information onto the console. Okay, so this is an inbuilt function that Python gives to us. Another function is the type function. The type function also help us to check the data types of the data type on an object or a sequence of character. Okay, so now what we can do is another function is the length function. So the length function gives us the ability for us to check the length of a sequence, a list, or a dictionary or an object. Okay, now the inbuilt functions, okay, or functions in general, comes in three forms. That is the inbuilt function, the user-defined function, and anonymous function. So if you don't know what anonymous function is, I have a video linked at the top section here. You can click on that link to actually learn about the anonymous function. And I also have videos links in the description below that you can click on to explore various inbuilt function in Python. Okay, so now let's get back into the inbuilt function. Now, the inbuilt function, they help us to accomplish a common task in Python, of which I explained that they help us to display some information onto the display console. Now, these functions are not written by you, okay, so you cannot write function to display information, okay, even though you can do so, but Python gives us this function, right? Okay, it comes along with Python. So this is what you need to know about the inbuilt function. So we have the enumerate, we have the range function, we have the type, we have the help, we have the length function, and also we have the print function as well as the input function. So this is all that you need to know about the inbuilt functions in Python. Now, next on the list, we have user-defined functions. Now, at a stage in our program, we want to be able to create our own function. Now, this function that we create by ourselves is what we call the user-defined functions. Now, user-defined function helps us to break a large code into separate function or chunks of code or chunks of functions, so that we can collectively combine these chunks to solve a specific problem. Okay, now next up is what we call creating a user-defined function. Now that we've learned about the user-defined function, now the big question is, how can we create a user-defined function? We can create a user-defined function by using four things. First of all, we need the def keyword. Second, we need an identifier, which is the function name, followed by a parenthesis and a colon. So let me demonstrate how to create a user-defined function. So over here, I'm just going to write the def keyword followed by an identifier, which is a function name. Okay, so I'll do greet person, okay, and I'll bring the parenthesis followed by a colon. Now, when you press enter after the colon, the cursor is going to send you to the body of the function. Now, here is where you can write an instruction for the function to follow in order to solve a specific problem. But here, I'm not going to write any specific instruction. I'm just going to display a message of saying that print, so hello user, okay, hello user, welcome to functions, okay, in Python. That's what I'm going to say. Okay, welcome to functions in Python. Now, what this function is doing is that this function is greeting a person, as the name describes. So greet person. So I'm just saying that hello user, welcome to functions in Python. So this is how to create a user-defined function. Now, this is solving a specific problem that you have set to create. Okay, so you're just greeting a person by saying welcome user, hello user, welcome to Python, to functions in Python. Okay, now that we've been able to learn how to create a user-defined function, next up is how to call this function. Now, once we create a function, how do we actually tend to call this function, or how do you actually make this function run and display the instruction that we give to this function? What we can do is that we can write the function name. So here I'm going to have a comment here by saying calling the function, all right, greet person. Okay, so greet person, calling the function greet person. So what I'm going to do is that I'm just going to bring the function name, that is greet person, okay, followed by a parenthesis. Now this is how we call a function in Python. Now, so when I run this block of code, I'm going to see that we have the instruction that we give to the function to print or display this information onto the output window. Okay, so now we see here, hello user, welcome to Python functions in Python. Okay, now what we can do is that once we've learned how to create a function and also learned how to call a function, it is time for us to learn something that we call DocString in Python. Okay, so function DocString. Now the full name of the DocString is what you call the documentation string, but in short we call it DocString. Now DocString actually gives us the ability for us to write a guide as to how this function is being implemented. Okay, so now I'm just going to write a quick example. Okay, but before that, let's take another example of how to create a user-defined function. So now I can write another function using the def keyword, writing say hello. Okay, so now it doesn't take anything. I'm just going to print something like hello there. Okay, hello there, welcome. Okay, so welcome, like this. So what I can do is that to call the function, all that I can do is that I can write the function name, say hello. Okay, and what I'm going to do is that I'm just going to bring a parenthesis, and when I call this function, it is just going to display the instruction or what we said the function should do. Now, how to write a DocString is very simple. What you need to do is that you create a function called, let's say, display name. Okay, so display name. Then what we do is that in writing a DocString, we can use a single triple quote or a double triple quote. Okay, so what I mean by a single triple quote is writing 1 2 3, okay, hitting on the quotes 3 times. So this is a single triple quote, and this is also a double triple quote. So you can use any of this to write your DocString. Now what I'm going to do is that I'm going to just write I'm just going to write something about this function. So I'm going to say this function, okay, this function has only, so let's say has only one local variable, okay, which is name. Okay, so it has only one local variable, and the parameters that this function have, it doesn't have any parameters. So parameter, this function has no parameter. Okay, has no parameter. And the return function, so the parameters and the return function, we are just going to look at all these things. So returns, so this function returns, okay, nothing. Okay, that is what I'm going to say, returns nothing. Now this is a DocString, so what I'm going to do is that I'm going to have a variable called name, and I'm going to set it to Jane Smith. Okay, so Jane Smith, and what I'm going to do is that I'm just going to print the name. So I'm just going to say an F string and say something like my name is, and I'm going to bring the name here. Okay, so this is what this function is doing. Okay, this is what this function is doing. So here I'm just going to call the function. So I'm just going to write a comment like something calling the function display name, okay, over here. So now what I'm going to do is that I'm just going to call display name over here, and when I run this code, we see that the function is saying that my name is Jane Smith. Okay, now what's this function? The good thing about this function is that this function has a documentation string, okay, as to how this function is being, what this function is doing, and what this function accepts as a parameter, and what this function also returns. So now if I want to write the DocString, or if I want to see the DocString as to how this function is being used, what I can do is that I can use the inbuilt function, that is the help. So here I'm just going to so writing a comment, so displaying the DocString, okay, on the display, okay, display name. So what I'm going to do is that I'm just going to use the print function, call the help function also, and bring the function name. So display name. Now when I run this code, we are just going to see that help on function display name in the module. Okay, so now here we see the function name, and what we have is that this function has only one local variable, which is name. The parameters are this function has no parameters, and the return values, the return statement is that this function returns nothing. So this is what this is the guide as to how this function is being used, and what this function accepts as a parameter, and what this function also returns. Now we can equally use this same code to also display the docstring by calling the function name and using the __doc__doc on the function to also display. So what we have here is equally using the help function. So here we see that this function has only one local variable, which is name, no parameters, and no return values. Okay, now next on the list is what we call we are going to look at functions with no parameters. Okay, so functions can have parameters, and function can also take no parameters. So let's look at function with no parameters. Now we've seen such an example of functions with no parameters. That is the greet person and also say hello. So we see that in here the parenthesis inside before the function identifier is empty because we have not passed anything inside the function. So this makes this function a function with no parameter. So let's say something like let's have a function called name, then so def, let's say print name. Okay, print _ name, and what it's going to do is that it's just going to print the name of a person or a programming language. So let's say print Python programming. Okay, programming language. That is what you're going to print. Now when I call this function, what is going to happen is that it is going to display what we have told the function to print. Okay, that is the print name. When I call this function, we see Python programming language over here. Now what is happening is that this function does not accept any parameter, but it is just displaying an instruction that we give to the function to display when the function is being called. So this is a function with no parameter. Now next on the list is what we call or we have the difference between a parameter and an argument. Okay, now it is time for, before we learn about function that takes parameters or function that takes multiple parameters, it will be appropriate for us to know the difference between parameters and arguments. Okay, so I made a typo over here. I think it's over here. So functions with, I think I have G over here. So functions with parameters and difference between parameters and argument. Now what is the difference between parameter and an argument? Now a parameter is a variable that is passed inside the function parenthesis. Okay, so when you define a function, when you pass a variable into the function parenthesis, that is called a parameter. So now let's take a look over here. Now let's copy, or let's rewrite, or let's modify this function over here. Okay, now let's add a name over here so that we can specifically give it an argument when the function is being called. Now here, this is a parameter called name. Okay, this is a parameter called name. Now this parameter should be able you should be able to pass in an argument, okay, when the function is being called. So the difference is that the parameter is just a variable, and the argument is the value that we pass to the function when the function is being called. Okay, so now here what I'm doing is I'm just going to print the name. Okay, name. Then when I'm calling this function print name, all I'm going to do is that I'm just going to pass in Jane Smith, okay, over here, so that the function will give the function an argument, so that this argument will be a value to this variable over here. Now when this function is being called, we see that we have the name displayed successfully over here. So now this is the difference between a parameter and an argument. Mind you, a parameter is a variable, and the argument is the value that we pass when the function is being called, and the argument, the the parameter is the variable that we pass in the parentheses of a function when the function is being created. Okay, so this is the difference between a parameter and an argument. Now next on our list we have parameter, a function with only one parameter. So this is a function with only one parameter. So over here we are seeing a function with only one parameter. So here we have a function print name that takes a name as a parameter, and it is just printing the name. All that the function is doing is that it is just printing the name for us. So here when this function is being called, all that it does is that we have to give it an argument so that the argument will be a value to the variable. So in short, this is what we call function with only one parameter. Now next on the list is what we call the return keyword in so functions with return keyword. Now let me demonstrate a quick example over here using this one. So now over here we see that we are printing the name over here. Okay, now when I wrap the function name with print statement, okay, the print function, and I run this code, we see that we have two outputs, even though we instructed the function to print only one output. But the Python added one output over here, which is the none. Okay, now the none here indicates that at the time that the function is being called, okay, this print function does not return anything to the function caller. So when the function is being called, the function actually has nothing to return. It is only printing the name to the console. So meaning that when the function caller calls the function, it does not return anything. That is why we have none here. But when I replace this print function with another keyword called return, and I'm just returning the name over here, what it's going to do is that when the function caller calls the function, what is going to happen is that now the function actually has something to return. So now when I run this code, we will see that the none value has disappeared because the function is actually returning something to the function caller. I hope this makes a lot of sense and you are able to understand. But if you don't understand what I'm saying, just pause the video, try to understand the concept, and also move on. So this is what we call the return statement. So let's pick another example over here. So with what we call, so let's say function, so display message. Okay, let's have a display message over here, function that takes in a message. Okay, then what we are doing is that we are just returning the message over here. Now what is going to happen is that when we print this function, or when we call this function, that is the display message, and we call it and pass in an argument that is, let's say so learn about the return statement. Okay, learn about the return statement in Python over here. So as simple as that. So now when we call this function, we see that we have a string over here saying that learn about the return statement in Python. Okay, so equally when we wrap this function with a print function, we're going to see that we have learn about the return statement in Python. So this is a simple example of how you can use the Python return statement. Okay, now next on the list is what we call functions with multiple parameters. Now functions can also have multiple parameters. All that you need to do is that you have to separate the parameters with commas. Okay, now let me demonstrate an example of how we can call or we can create a function with multiple parameters. So let's say we have a function called, let's say add all. Okay, add all. And what this add all does is that it accepts 4 parameters, that is A, B, C, and D. Now what this function will return is that this function is going to return the sum of all these parameters. So we have A plus B plus C and plus D. So now when we call this function, that is the add all. Okay, when you call the add all, what is going to happen is that we give it a parameter of an argument, not a parameter, an argument of 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay, now when this function is being called, we are going to see that we have 10 over here, which is 2 plus 1 plus 2 is 3, 3 plus 3 is 6, and 6 plus 4 is 10. So this is how we can pass multiple parameters into a function. All that you need to do is that you will just separate the parameters with a comma. Okay, that is how calling multiple parameters does in function in the Python function. Now next up, so we can equally have another example. So let's have another example of, let's say, def, then we have subtract, okay, subtract underscore or, and we have the same parameters. So you can have these same parameters over here, and what I'm going to do is that we're just going to return a tuple, or let's say so a minus b minus c minus d. And now when this function is being called, so when this function is being called and we pass in 3, 4, 5, 6, I think this is more than 4. So now when we run this code, we're going to see that we have -10 over here. So this is an example of how to pass multiple parameters into the function when you create the function, and also pass the corresponding argument when the function is being called. Now next on the list is what we call the function argument and function keyword argument, and how they work. Now Python also gives us a special symbol that we can use in the function, okay? That is the star. So we can use a star in front of the parameter, and this parameter is going to be converted into a sequence. And we know that when we have a sequence, we can equally loop through the sequence, and we can also use the for loop to loop through the sequence, okay? Now let's demonstrate the functions with the arguments, okay? So let's say functions with arguments, okay? Functions with argument. Now what we can have here is that, assuming that let's go back to this function over here, that is the add all. Now we saw that in the add all we had to specify 4 parameters, and let me show you a trick over here, that when I add one more argument into the function call, it is going to break this function, okay? Now what we can use the arguments, the Python argument, to solve this problem, okay? So here I'm going to write a function called add underscore final, okay? So the final, I'm just going to bring a star here, and I'm going to bring only one parameter. Now what this one parameter is going to do is that Python is going to use this special symbol that has been placed in front of this parameter a. Python is going to convert this parameter into a sequence, and now when we have a sequence, we can use the for loop on it. So before that, what I'm going to do is that I'm going to return the sum using the sum inbuilt function. I'm going to return the sum of all the a, okay? And now when I call the function add underscore final, what is going to happen is that I can pass as many arguments as I want, and the function is going to sum all of them up without any complaint. Now by passing in multiple parameters, we could see that we are limited when we only pass in a certain number of parameters, and when we exceed that parameter, the function is going to error, okay? Now here what you can do is that you can pass in many arguments, and the function will not break, okay? So 10. When I run this code, we'll get 55. So here we're seeing that using this special character in front of this parameter gives this parameter a special feature, which is converting this parameter into a sequence, okay? Now one thing that we can also do is that, since this special character gives this parameter a special ability to convert it into a sequence, what you can do is that we can also write a function that will loop through this sequence and add them one by one. So let's also do a function over here. So function add final 2, okay? That will also accept this special symbol with a parameter a. And what I'm going to do is that I'm going to have a counter over here which is set to 0. And what I'm going to do is that, so 0, what I'm going to do is that I'm going to have a for loop. So saying for I, okay, in a, what I'm going to do is that I'm just going to call the count and add the I to it. So count plus equal I. And what I'm going to do is that I'm just going to return the count over here, so that when this function is being called, so add underscore final 2, when we call this function and pass in, let's say 12, 34, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and so on. We can have the same corresponding output. So we have 61 here. So using this special character in front of a parameter gives the parameter an ability to be converted into a sequence. And when we have a sequence, mind you that we can use the for loop on the sequence. Now, next up is what we call the keyword arguments. Now, the keyword arguments help us to pass in a key and a value when we call the function. So now let's demonstrate that also. Now, assuming we wanted to create a function, okay, that's a person function, okay, that would take in the person's name, the person's age, the person's job, the person's salary, and also the country of the person, and convert it into a dictionary. So what you can do is that we can use the keyword arguments that Python gives to us. And now let's call this function person, okay, and what we can do is that we can use the 2 stars in front of this parameter. So the parameter can be anything, but what we usually do is that we use the 2 stars and we have the keyword argument over here. So we use this variable over here. Now what is going to happen is that when we want to convert the person, the parameter, the arguments that we give to the function when the function is being called to a dictionary, what we can do is that we can use the keyword argument. Now over here, I'm just going to create a person empty dictionary. So what I'm going to create is that I'm going to have a variable that is an empty dictionary. And what is going to happen is that since this argument that we are going to give to the function is going to be converted into a keyword and a keyword and its value, what we can do here is that we can loop through this keyword, okay, so for every key and value, okay, inside this keyword argument. So we can say in the keyword argument over here dot, let's use the dictionary method, that is the items, okay, and we call this. So now here what I'm going to do is that I'm just going to call the empty dictionary that we created, so the person dictionary, and I'm going to pass in the key and set the key to the corresponding value that we have over here. And at the end of the day, I'm just going to return the person object, okay, the person dictionary that we created over here. So what is going to happen is that when this function is being called, okay, that is the person function, when this function is being called, what we can do is that we can give it a key and a value. So the key is just, let's say, name is equal to, let's call it Jane Smith, okay, and we have the job, okay, so the key is job, and the value is, let's say, a developer, okay, and we have the age set to 25, and also we have the salary of the person. The salary is equal to 75,000, okay, 75,000, and lastly we have the country of the person is set to the United States, okay, the United States. Okay, now this is it. So when we call this function, we see that the function is going to return a dictionary converting the keyword, the arguments that we gave to the function. This keyword argument is going to be converted into a dictionary. So what is going to happen is that now this function is returning something. So we can store that value that the function is returning into a variable called Jane, okay, and we run this function. Now over here, we can just print the variable Jane, and we are going to get a dictionary that is so that every keyword, that every argument that was passed into the function has now been converted into a dictionary. So guys, this brings us to the end of the video. Now what I want you to take mainly from this video is that we can use our user-defined function to create our own custom function. We can use the return keyword in the function to return something, so that when the function caller calls the function, it has something to return, and the function will not return a null value in addition to the instruction that we give to the function. Secondly, we can also have function with no parameters, functions with one parameter, function with multiple parameter, and we also understand the difference between a parameter and an argument. And lastly, we saw how to use the special symbols in front of a parameter, that is the 1 star and the double star. That is the 1 star represents the argument and the double star represents the keyword argument. That gives us the functionalities for us to convert the arguments that we pass to the function to a dictionary. This is the end of this tutorial. So if you don't understand anything or if you think I left anything out, make sure to leave those suggestions in the comment section. And with that said, I'll see you guys in the next tutorial. Bye.